There is a specific feeling that every intelligent person knows. You have all the information, you understand the problem, you know what the answer is supposed to look like, and yet, nothing. That gap between knowing the pieces and seeing how they connect is where most people give up, and it is exactly where one book begins. In 1945, a Hungarian mathematician named George Polya published a slim volume that would go on to sell over 1 million copies. Not because it was easy, because it was true. Here is the problem that Polya saw: students were learning mathematics. They could memorize theorems, they could reproduce proofs, but ask them to solve something they had never seen before, and they froze. The knowledge was there, the ability to use it was not. Polya believed this was not a talent problem, it was a teaching problem. Schools were training students to receive answers, not to find them, and this, he argued, was not just an academic failure, it was a fundamental misunderstanding of what thinking actually is. Thinking is not retrieval, it is construction, and construction requires a process. Polya's answer was a framework, 4 phases, simple to describe, genuinely difficult to master. Phase 1. Understand the problem, not skim it, not assume you understand it, actually map it. What is the unknown? What data do you have? What is the condition linking them? Phase 2. Devise a plan, find the connection between your data and your unknown. This is where most of the real work happens. Phase 3. Carry out the plan, execute with precision. Phase 4. Look back, review the solution, extract what you learned, ask if there is a simpler or more general path. 4 steps. But here is what most people miss: the steps are not equal. The second phase, devising the plan, is where discovery actually lives. The rest is scaffolding around it. The engine of Polya's entire method is one deceptively simple question: do you know a related problem? When you face something unfamiliar, your instinct is to treat it as entirely new. Polya says that instinct is almost always wrong. Almost every problem you will ever face has a structural cousin that you have already solved. The data might look different, the context might be unrecognizable, but the underlying shape of the problem, the relationship between the unknown and the condition, is familiar. The trained mind does not invent from nothing, it searches its memory for patterns. It asks, where have I seen this shape before? And then it imports the method. Polya called this mobilizing dormant knowledge. It is, he argued, the single most powerful move available to a problem solver. One of Polya's most counterintuitive ideas has a name: the inventor's paradox. It states that the more ambitious plan may have a greater chance of success than the narrow one. This sounds wrong. Simpler is easier, we assume. But Polya saw something different. When a problem is too specific, the mind gets trapped in its particular details. Edge cases, exceptions, contradictions. The very specificity that feels like clarity is actually camouflage for the underlying structure. By generalizing the problem, by stripping away the noise and asking what the problem really is at its core, you often reveal a mechanism so clean that solving it becomes straightforward. A programmer who writes a general algorithm to sort any dataset will usually find it easier than writing a custom solution for 3 specific spreadsheets. The general version forces them to think in pure logic. Polya also gave equal weight to the opposite: maneuver, specialization. If the general problem is too abstract, try a limiting case, set one variable to 0, collapse the shape into a line. What happens at the extremes often reveals what is true everywhere. Underneath the 4 phases, Polya embedded something more radical, a theory of reasoning itself. He drew a hard line between 2 kinds of thinking: demonstrative reasoning, which is the rigid logic of formal proof, and plausible reasoning, which is the engine of discovery. Mathematical proofs, as they appear in textbooks, are demonstrative. Each step is airtight, the conclusion is certain, but that is not how the proof was found. The proof was found through guessing, through analogy, through the heuristic syllogism, a form of logic Polya described like this: if A implies B and B turns out to be true, then A becomes more credible. Not proven, more credible. This is how a doctor reasons. If the patient has this condition, they will have elevated markers. The markers are elevated, the diagnosis becomes plausible. This is how a scientist reasons before they have the data, and this is how every major problem is actually solved, not by deduction alone, but by the disciplined accumulation of plausible evidence pointing in a direction worth pursuing. The final proof hides all of this. It presents the answer as inevitable, but the work that created the proof was anything but. Everything Polya described in 1945 maps directly onto how the highest performing systems work today. In software engineering, a senior developer who encounters an unfamiliar bug does exactly what Polya prescribes. They isolate the unknown, they search for structural parallels in past code bases, they write the most general solution that makes the problem tractable, not the most specific one that handles only this case. In artificial intelligence, retrieval augmented generation, one of the dominant architectures in modern AI systems, is essentially Polya's related problem question implemented in code. Before reasoning, search your memory for relevant structure. In management, the most effective leaders do not solve their team's problems. They ask structured questions that guide the team to find the solution themselves. This is Polya's teaching method applied to organizations. The framework is not dated. The framework is fundamental. It describes how cognition works when it is working correctly. Polya was honest about the parts we prefer to skip. He called one of them incubation, the frustrating phase where you have done all the work and nothing has come yet, where you have gathered every piece of data, tried every approach, hit every wall, and then you step away. He was clear. The breakthrough cannot arrive unless the exhaustion comes first. The subconscious cannot work on a problem it has not been given. The walk in the park only produces insight if the hours at the desk preceded it. He was also honest about what looking back really means, not checking the arithmetic, asking deeper questions. Can I derive this result a different way? What is the most general statement I can make from this solution? What method did I use, and where else might it apply? Most people stop the moment they find the answer. Polya considered that the moment the real work begins. Polya's core claim is uncomfortable for a certain kind of person. It says that genius is largely a myth, that the great problem solvers of history were not operating on a different plane. They were asking better questions more systematically, and they were willing to sit with the discomfort of not knowing longer than everyone else. The mystique around discovery dissolves when you see the machinery underneath it. Analogy, specialization, auxiliary problems, working backwards. These are not metaphors, they are moves, repeatable, learnable, transferable moves. What Polya gave the world was not just a book about mathematics, it was a manual for anyone who has ever stared at a blank page, a broken system, or an unsolved question and wondered whether they simply were not smart enough. They were. They just needed a better question to ask first. The next time you are stuck, do not ask yourself. If you are smart enough to solve it, ask, what is the unknown? Do I know a related problem? And what happens if I generalize? If you want to go deeper into the ideas that shaped modern thinking, subscribe. A new book breakdown drops every week.